I intend, hopefully, to continue to have monthly meetings with the Men's Club. They will be, because of this bizarre world we live in, we'll have it by Zoom for the next several months until this thing calms down. If anyone has any suggestions for speakers or programs, I'm open to any ideas. I certainly have some of my own. Some of you may remember I did this once before, a decade or so. I have an idea of where we're going. And you can, if you want to find me, I'm in the synagogue directory. I'm certainly in the phone book, and probably by Google as well. I'm going to ask everyone, if they can, to go ahead and mute themselves so that only the speaker can be heard. When we have mass Zoom meetings, you hear the dog bark, you hear the phone ring, and lots of people talking. So it's best, at least until we get to a questionnaire period, if everyone puts on their Zoom, puts on their mute.
Warren.
Yes.
Do you want us to use our masks?
Only if you feel that it's needed. I'm not going to put on my mask, and I don't think Isaac will have his mask on either. But it's a nice touch. I appreciate the leadership. Okay, what else did I want to cover before we get started? I wanted to mention something. High holidays are coming up, and many of us will be attending by Zoom. I attend Morning Minyan once a week and occasionally come to Shabbat services by Zoom. I have found it to be much more pleasurable and enriching if I have a book. So the high holiday books are available at the synagogue. You just need to contact the synagogue. Ken and the people there will make arrangements to leave one at the front desk as you walk in the door.
Michael, can you help me?
So the synagogue is charging a $36 deposit on the book that's fully refundable after the high holidays. So I throw that in as an advertisement. I think it'll make high holidays more enjoyable for those of us who do. I did want to mention before I get started with the program that the Men's Club has always been associated with Morning Minyan. And one of the great things about our synagogue is that we have a daily minyan. We do it every morning. On weekdays, we do it at 7:15. We're doing it now on Zoom. It is really easy. At 7:15 or anytime thereafter, just click on the Zoom connection. And as I say, if you'll contact the synagogue, you can even get a book. All right, with that being said, I have the distinct honor.
Warren,
yes.
I'm sorry. Can I just say one thing? First of all, I just want to say thank you for revitalizing Men's Club. It is much appreciated. But I just wanted to clarify that high holidays are not going to be on Zoom. They're going to be streamed through the website. So it's not Zoom. I just didn't want people to think it was on Zoom.
Okay. Well, you'll be able to use the computer to go to high holiday services.
Correct.
And visual aid, get your book.
And you are right about, yes, you're right about the prayer book. And thank you again, Warren.
You're very welcome.
So Warren.
Yes.
Let's make things long. So if there are here some people that are not from Tampa, if they can introduce themselves, maybe. Do you have people that live in other states?
Well, you recognize one of the faces there. Your good friend and my cousin, Fran Goldberg, is there. She was there a moment ago. Fran, are you still there? Fran lives in Las Vegas and was a member of Rabbi's congregation before he came to us in Tampa. So
I'm here. I'm here.
There's my cousin Fran, who called me and recommended this wonderful guy who was looking for a position as a cantor in Tampa, and we were very fortunate to have that connection made.
You are so lucky. You have no idea.
Thank you.
It was so missed here.
I'm going to mute Fran now.
Okay, so back to my introduction. And oh, by the way, I also wanted to mention we have another cantor who's listening tonight. So Roselle, Thank you for attending, Michael. It's always good to hear your voice. Rizal was the cantor at Sherazetic for many years, and she's now working in Sebring, I believe, correct? Rizal, I think she's on mute, but, oh, there you go.
Yeah,
Giselle, you wanna
she's
say-
working in Sebring. She
Yes.
lives in Sarasota.
Right, Michael is her husband, and they live in Sarasota, and she works out of Sebring, so it's good to have you here. Michael's an old friend, and Rizal is certainly a valued member of our community. Okay, so I think that's all the introductions. Marcy said hello. We also happen to have my other son, Zach, who's coming in from New York, where he's doing a residency. But we're here for me to introduce my son, Isaac. It is with great honor and privilege that I get to do this. Isaac is born and raised in Tampa, graduate of Plant High School, University of Florida. He also happens to have a master's degree at George Mason he got while he was in the military, stationed in DC. He has done tours on various ships. He's been on the USS Ogden, the Underwood, and the USS Cole. He served as executive officer on the Ramage, and he is now the commanding officer of the USS Ramage, which is a destroyer based in Norfolk. Isaac's done a number of interesting shore duties. He's been an aide to Vice Admiral John Morgan. He was an analyst in the strategy working group with Middle East and Asia policy, Afghanistan, Pakistan strategy. He was an aide to Congressman Joe Courtney out of Connecticut. He served as executive assistant to the Department of the Navy Chief of Legislative Affairs, Admiral Fowler. And up until he left to go to the Ramage, he was working in the Joint Chiefs of Staff as the China Desk Officer for the Deputy Director for Political Military Affairs for the area of Asia. So Isaac has done some interesting and incredible things, and it's always exciting to hear some of his stories. So Isaac, I will turn this over to you. I assume the kids have been taken care of, and it's up to you to tell us what you've been doing, especially this last winter.
Yeah, thank you, Dad. Thank you for having me. It's good to be back home in Tampa virtually. When I was listening to a podcast recently, and I came across what I think is the opposite, or we all know the word nakas is the pride you take in your children. I think I may be missing the meaning a little bit, but point's the same. The word yuckas, which is the pride your children take in your parents, and I gotta say there's quite a lot of pride when your father asks you to participate in an event based on your professional career. So thank you for asking me here. So that being said, yeah, so I've done quite a few things over my 20-year career. I served in San Diego. I deployed shortly after the Gulf War to Iraq. I served in a ship in Mayport, Florida, right outside of Jacksonville, deployed to South America, and then most recently deployed to the Middle East over the fall of 2019 into the spring of 2020. And then the various shorties, happy to talk about any of those if the need arises. I've done a little bit of time in the NSC at the end of the Obama administration, and then at the beginning of the Trump administration work in China policy. So kind of what came here tonight to talk about, though, was really the sort of my last deployment on Ramage. So if you don't know, just some background real quick. It's always tough to talk to people who may or may not know much about the military and how much detail to go into. So I'm a commander, which is generally a CO of a destroyer, which is kind of a middle-sized ship. A commander is the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel in the Air Force or the Army or the Marine Corps. So I've been commissioned for about 18 years, which is about when you get to be a CO of a ship. The destroyer Ramage is a ballistic missile defense Arleigh Burke class destroyer. It was built it was commissioned in 1995, so it's one of the original 10 destroyers. The first destroyer of the Arleigh Burke class was 51, we're 61, so we're kind of on the older side. The ship has about 300 people, deploys about 300 people. We are sort of anachronistically one of the last ships that has an all-male crew. We've gotten the modification to have females on board. We just never have had the manning action done. So we have about a dozen female officers in my wardroom, but for the most part, it's all male. So we are one of the older DDGs. That being said, they always modernize the older ships first because those are the older ones. So in our last shipyard period, before our last deployment, we were upgraded to Aegis Baseline 9, which is the sort of cutting edge level of naval technology in terms of the radar and the missile systems. So when we deployed in August of 2019, we were certified in about 26 different warfare areas, which means, anything from how to drive a ship, how to anchor, how to fight a fire on board, how to run an engineering plant, all the way through shooting ballistic missiles out of space. So anything in that gamut, from running down pirates and chasing guys with small boats, to fighting a fire on the ship, to highest naval combat, we get certified in all that before we leave for deployment. And we left in August of 2019. One of the strange things about the DDGs, or interesting things, kind of how you look at it, is that we're sort of the utility infielder. So the DDG, the Arleigh Burke DDG, is the workhorse of the fleet. So when we go overseas, we generally kind of have an idea where we're going, but we don't really know what that's going to entail. So when we left for deployment in August, we thought we may be going up to chase Russian submarines in the North Atlantic. We thought we may be going to, trade some, rub shoulders with Russian service combatants in the Eastern Mediterranean, or we may be going to the Middle East to do some maritime security operations in the Persian Gulf. We actually first stopped off in Flushing, the Netherlands. We did a parade of sail there for the anniversary of the liberation of the Netherlands from German occupation. That was kind of fun. We then went to Lebanon. We pulled into Beirut. We were the first ship to pull into Beirut in about 26 years. Then the military, in particular CENTCOM, the combatant commander for the U.S. military in the Middle East, has made a lot of efforts to bring Lebanon into the fold of the coalition of U.S. partners. And part of that is the Lebanese military is really the most stable arm of their government. So the mill-to-mill relationship there has been the inroad for the U.S. government to sort of start to build that relationship, which has really been non-existent for a lot of years. And certainly with Hezbollah's influence has been sort of beat down by forces within the country. So getting a U.S. Navy destroyer into Beirut was a big deal. We provided we hosted a ceremony on board the flight deck. We had members of the parliament, general, people from the government, U.S. ambassadors, a lot of the other ambassadors from other countries that were there. It was a big win for the U.S. It was obviously, actually, if you saw the explosion in Lebanon's port, we were about, 500 yards from where that explosion happened, right at the pier, their commercial pier, which was kind of spooky a little bit, I guess. So we were there overnight once, and then we headed out after that to go through the Red Sea and around to the Persian Gulf. We got the Persian Gulf around September of 2019, and we're there really until about February. So most of our deployment was spent inside the Gulf, the Persian Gulf, or the Arabian Gulf. The one thing that we train for is, and sure, it makes the news quite a bit, is the aggressive actions of the Iranian Navy. And a lot of times when you see headlines about it, it's them dropping mine-like objects or aggressively maneuvering near U.S. ships, or any number of sort of inflammatory actions that they take on a daily basis. And that's kind of what we get geared up for as we're getting ready to go over there. What I found, and I think what my crew found, was that generally the Iranians, the individual guys that we're interacting with, so sailors on small boats, their Navy is not anywhere near our size. Most of their boats are coastal patrol craft, or very small combatants that maybe held 20 or 30 people. Those guys are generally very professional. When they would, they're clearly running off of a script that they've been told to follow when they interact with a Navy vessel, a U.S. Navy vessel. They come in, we would have bridge-to-bridge interaction with them. They would speak very good English, almost without accent English. They would say, "This is what we're going to do." We would say, "Hey, we're here. We're patrolling in international waters." They would come up. They would get about 500 or 600 yards off of us. They would hold position there for a minute. Guns manned but not trained on us. So they're posturing but not being overly aggressive. And then they would kind of go away. And that was sort of the MO that we had for the majority of our deployment. It was, we would see them, they'd come out, they'd take a look, we would respond, we kind of did our thing, played the dance between the two of us, and then they would go back to wherever they came from, be it an island or the coast, and that was it. So it was not nearly the level of aggression that I had expected going over there. And the context now, we kind of forget. One of the things I wanted to talk about was the fact that we were there during right after General Soleimani got hit by U.S. airstrike. But kind of before that happened, if you remember, the Iranians had hijacked a couple of tankers. So the Navy, after really sort of winding down its presence in the Middle East, in the Persian Gulf or in the Arabian Gulf, and in that area, and really trying to focus more on the Eastern Mediterranean and a rising Russian presence, and certainly a rising Chinese presence, had sort of taken more risk in terms of a lower presence in the Middle East, and that had may or may not have contributed to the Iranians pushing the envelope a little bit to go after some shipping. Part of that was Iranian oil smuggling that's been going on for a long time based on sanctions that happened throughout the Obama administration and the Trump administration. So they were trying to make money themselves. The British had seized, if you recall, the British had seized a tanker in Gibraltar, which then the Iranians responded. So there was also a takedown of an American drone, a UAV that was off of the Iranian coast. The Iranians had shot down. And then on top of all this, there was also a lot of back and forth inside of Iraq with Iranian proxies and what they were sort of generally kind of shooting at Iranian or American or Iraqi bases with Americans on them. So we still have a small footprint there left with after the fight from ISIS. And the Iranian proxies would just take pot shots, Katyusha rockets, kind of launch some rockets out of the back of a truck and then run away real quick. Nothing particularly accurate, but this was sort of the context that we drove into when we entered the Arabian Sea in September. Generally, day to day, it really wasn't that that exciting. For the most part, we were operating inside of an operation called Operation Sentinel, which the U.S. and the British had set up in that region to escort or at least overwatch all U.S. and British flag shipping going in and out of the Arabian Sea. If you've ever heard of or been to Dubai before, Dubai is a huge commercial port now, not just for the Middle East, but there are a lot of major American companies that have set up manufacturing industrial base, huge factories. They bring in a lot of foreign workers from Pakistan and Indonesia, different parts of Southeast Asia, to do a lot of low cost labor. And that ends up being a major hub for not just the Middle East, but also for other parts of Europe and some parts of the United States for manufactured goods because it's so cheap there. So the impact of the Iranians, possibly shutting down shipping or at least harassing shipping, especially American shipping, and out of the Arabian Sea was a big problem for the U.S. and obviously we had to do something about that. So we teamed up with the British, and we launched Operation Sentinel, and essentially that was a U.S. or British destroyer, one on each side of the Arabian or the Straits of Hormuz, that would sit there and essentially ship drove through. That area of the strait actually drives through some of Iranian territorial waters as it's going through the strait. So the Iranians had a great opportunity to pick off somebody if they wanted to. So we would sit there, the British would sit there and just make sure we had radio contact with the captains. Occasionally the Iranians would come out and take a look. We'd speed up to go kind of just escort them through. But for the most part, once we sort of showed up and made a point of our presence being known, things kind of calmed down. And for the first couple months we were there, it was relatively calm, not a whole lot of day-to-day interaction other than just we'd see them, they'd see us, we kind of wave at each other and go about our business. So that was the beginning. So I just wanted to make sure I got all these dates right because it kind of happened pretty quickly. So on December 27th, we had just left Jebel Ali, which is a pretty large port right outside of Dubai. And that's a big Navy area for doing maintenance. So we had been in Dubai for a week just doing some general maintenance on the ship. We got back underway, and we were getting ready, to pull back in right before New Year's to have New Year's in port. And Kataib Hezbollah shot at an airbase right outside of Kirkuk, killing a U.S. contractor. So the U.S. had, and I think still does, have American both service members and contractors in Iraqi bases assisting with training, generally also with the fight against ISIS. So the Kataib Hezbollah had been shooting at that base for a while and finally just got lucky with some unguided rockets and killed an American. 2 days after that, President Trump ordered an airstrike on some bases inside Iraq. There were also Kataib Hezbollah. They killed 25 of their fighters. Then right after, and this is how these things get started, right? So we do one thing, they do another, and then we go back and forth for a little while. So that was the 29th of December. That was Sunday. Friday was the strike on the American. Sunday was the airstrike on Kataib Hezbollah. And then Tuesday, December 31st, New Year's Eve, there was an embassy. What we think, and it was reported in the news, was that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps had arranged the storming of the American compound in the Green Zone, what used to be called the Green Zone, Baghdad, and that nearly overran the compound, and that was seen as a direct retaliation for the airstrike on Kataib Hezbollah. So it's Tuesday. Fast forward to Friday, 2 o'clock in the morning, an airstrike from a drone takes out General Soleimani, who was essentially, if the American equivalent, I think, would be somebody akin to the head of U.S. Special Operations Command. So a 4-star general, extremely senior in the military, in Iranian structure, also very politically connected, close to the Ayatollah. And this is a guy that had been around for years, doing different kinds of covert operations against the U.S., including in Iraq in 2003, while we were there. So this guy had a long history. He was an older gentleman, had been around. I think he was a fighter in the Iraq-Iran war in the 80s. So he had a long history of going after Americans, and he believed, based on news reporting, we believe that he was at least partially, if not directly, responsible for the direction of Kataib Hezbollah that had killed the Americans. So that was seen as a direct retaliation for the killing of the American and then the storming of the embassy. Then, if you kind of recall what was going on at that time, in 2020 now is this giant blur of bad things that have happened continually for the last 9 months. But those first few days, we didn't really know what the Iranian response was going to be. So the next day, several Iranian officials came out and said they had targets listed throughout the region. They were going to hit Tel Aviv, that everything wasn't safe. The Straits of Hormuz were in our sights. A lot of rhetorical statements about retaliatory actions that they were going to take in response to the killing of General Soleimani. So what we were doing, we had planned to be in, we had already planned our MWR celebration for New Year's Eve in Jebel Ali, which obviously got called off pretty quickly. So we were underway in the Arabian Gulf, in that sort of central Arabian Gulf area between, Qatar, Dubai, off Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, that area. And we're just sort of waiting to see what happens. So, the Straits of Hormuz is a very narrow area. It's inside most of the missile range, all of it's inside missile range from Iran. So once things get tense there, the Navy doesn't like to put a ship inside of a very narrow transit corridor that takes almost a day to get through. So just for the vulnerability reasons. So it just so happened that when this all started ramping up, that we were the only U.S. Navy large surface combatant in the Gulf at the time. There was some other minesweepers, some small minesweepers, and small patrol craft, along with a British destroyer and a British frigate. But that was basically it. Ramage is a ballistic missile defense destroyer on top of being an air defense destroyer. So we have the responsibility for both defending ourselves, defending other units that are around us, and then defending actually land bases from ballistic missile attack, which would be, there's sort of two types of missiles, right? There's missiles that fly, on the surface, they're cruise missiles or close to the surface. Then there's ballistic missiles, so the missiles that we would launch at Russia, ICBMs, or something smaller than that, which are just, at very high altitude, very fast missile, which is very hard to hit based on the just sort of physics of speed. So there's only a few units even in the United States Navy that can do that, and we're one of them. So we had the responsibility for defending, several targets around, American partners and American bases in the region, as well as, the ships that were with us. And we just kind of got underway and sailed around, and we're just, holding our breath for about a week and a half. At the time, if you recall, there was a lot of hemming and hawing between whether or not the U.S. was right, whether or not Soleimani was a bad guy. The Germans came out. A lot of the Europeans were very reluctant to sort of get behind the U.S. because of the fact that we struck the guy in Iraqi's territory. And then obviously he's a bad guy, so there wasn't nobody really knew where this was going to go at the time. And I don't think the Iranians knew where it was going to go. It was clear from once the strike happened, they pulled most of their assets back into port, or at least near it. So they were being very non-provocative. But based on the rhetoric coming out, we thought that it was entirely possible that they were going to launch ballistic missile strikes throughout the region, to include U.S. bases in Bahrain, Qatar, perhaps in Iraq, and maybe some of our allied partners in Dubai and UAE and Bahrain as well, in Saudi Arabia. That was while we were there, the Saudis, if you remember, there was the oil attack on the cruise missile attack on the Saudi oil terminals about the first month we got there. So that was also something we were looking for, possible retaliatory strikes. So we basically, we had been there for a while. We kind of knew the landscape. We had trained for this. So essentially, my guys, it's one thing to get ready for war. It's another thing to actually be sitting there waiting to get shot. And for the most part, we had a great chaplain on board. We had trained together for a long time. So, it's really, the Navy doesn't really do combat the way that the Army does, especially not in the last 10 years. We have been sort of, the last time the Navy really got any kind of large scale conflict was the '89 tanker war against also the Iranians, sort of in the same region. And that was what we were expecting. So as we were looking throughout the region, we were waiting for all these boats to come out, either if it was going to be cruise missile strikes or whatever. And we were basically just preparing for all sorts of scenarios. How are we going to station our forces? How are we going to protect some of the larger ships that were with us that were basically logistic ships? Where the rest of the area, the rest of the forces in the theater kind of dispersed to make sure that they were harder to hit. So things were moving around from their normal bases, which also made a longer flight to get in. So for the most part, we were essentially on our own, and we sat there for about a week, and then on the 8th of January, Iran launched 22 ballistic missiles at 2 different air bases, and fortunately, we have extremely good intelligence in that area, so we were able to detect the launches when they happened. We sort of knew they were getting ready to go based on the positioning of their forces, and our guys were able to get inside some of the actually Saddam-era bunkers that were still left at those bases to make sure that nobody was hurt. And in fact, nobody was hurt that night. There was some later reports in the news about guys having concussive problems based on the follow-on reactions to some of the explosions. But that night of that attack, that was the high point, a high watermark of the tension. I think I think in particular, we like to categorize the Iranians as rogue or loose cannons, or not really rational actors, I guess is the best way to put it. I think what it showed was that they are indeed rational actors. It was clear based on the position, the disposition of forces, the rhetoric coming out of the United States, that we were ready to continue to escalate. There's something we call in the military parlance called escalation dominance. Essentially, when you get into combat, you want to overcome your enemy's ability to retaliate. So if he's going to strike back, you want to make sure that your next strike is so powerful that it overcomes his ability to retaliate. You achieve escalation dominance, as we call it. And there's this other thing called off ramps, right? So you don't want to go. Nobody wants to go to war full-fledged, right? The Iranians don't want that. We don't want that. So where are your off ramps in this conflict? How do you achieve an outcome that still allows you to save face with your internal domestic audience, but also not not provoke your adversary to the point where he reacts again to your action. So I think the Iranian response was very measured. It was very direct. It was very proportional. It went after the airbase that launched the strikes from Soleimani, and it showed based on the strike itself as well as their posture throughout the region that they were very aware that this was teetering on the edge of a full-fledged war, and that was going to be very destructive for Iran. I'm sure some of you have been following this, that the Iranian economy has been teetering on the brink of just outright collapse for years now based on U.S. sanctions, and that any kind of major war with the U.S. would have, despite any initial successes with an attack, it would have resulted in an extremely destructive outcome for the Iranians. So I think in the end, that was a very measured, deliberate move they made in going after an airbase that was the airbase that launched the attack. And in the end, that proved to be the end of hostility. So once it was clear that that was their only action, that they only hit things that there was no loss of life, then the days after that followed, the Americans and President Trump kind of dialed back the rhetoric and was satisfied that was a sufficient response and that we had achieved it. Not only that, but if you look at it in the grand scheme of things afterwards, we eliminated a extremely powerful general in terms of attacking Americans. As I said earlier, General Soleimani was responsible for hundreds of American deaths throughout the Iraq War in 2003. I mean, he was, if you've heard about explosive foreign projectiles, a lot of the roadside bombs, IEDs, all the stuff that that the Iraqis and the Iraqi insurgents have been doing to the U.S. since we invaded in 2003. A lot of that can be traced back to General Soleimani, or at least his influence. So we were able to really degrade their ability to wage that war in terms of their command and control aspect. I think that despite the fact that he was replaced afterwards, I think that was a strategic victory for the United States, because there's not going to be anybody that has his level of impact throughout the Iranian region that he had based on decades of experience. So that was kind of my part in it. After that, it was kind of boring. After 2 weeks of really kind of getting ready to get shot at, we escorted a couple tankers. We pulled back into Jebali. We had a nice week in Dubai where we got the ship prepared a little bit. And then we headed back out in February around the Strait. We got relieved inside the Arabian Sea, and I left, but the ship, I had to come back to do some school to turn over as a CO, but the ship pulled into Haifa about 3 weeks later. So I got a nice opportunity. It was right before COVID went off the wall, so the ship got an opportunity to pull into Haifa. A lot of the crew got to go down to Jerusalem and see some of the sites up in the Golan area, as well as down south. So a really great opportunity after what was essentially about 3.5 months solid at sea in the Arabian Sea. So I guess I'll pause there. Any questions, or you want to discuss about that? Happy to talk about other things that went on in my career or other spots. I've done some time, like I said, working China issues and legislative affairs. So happy to discuss all those things.
Commander, can you hear me?
I can.
My name is Matt Krakauer. I'm calling you from Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm a retired
Right
Navy commander, and I just wanted you to know, and please pass it on to your troops, how proud we are of our military personnel today. Thank you for your service.
It's my pleasure. I will pass it on. Thank you.
Isaac, talk about the other ships that were in the area. Were there any aircraft carriers nearby?
Yeah, so the Iranians have made a pretty sizable advances in their ballistic missile capability over the last 10 to 15 years, as well as their cruise missile capability. So when I first came in the Navy, you regularly operated with 1 to 2 carriers inside the Arabian Sea at all times as they were there. Now that's not really the case. For the most part, if there's a carrier in Fifth Fleet, it's operating in the Indian Ocean, well outside of Iranian missile range, so that it's not directly threatened. It could still, its aircraft obviously can reach Iran, but there's a significant reduction in their operational radius because they're flying from so far out at sea. So that's really been a big change in terms of you know, the operational posture that we've had in the Middle East over the last 20 to 30 years. So the Harry S. Truman Strike Group was there. Several of the destroyers and cruiser escort were all outside in the northern Indian Ocean, just east of Oman. There was also some ships in the Red Sea at the time. So there was quite a bit of posture in the region, but it really was mainly limited to us and some smaller combatants inside the Gulf. So you know, I don't think, you know, who knows what would have happened, but you know, we were the only ones inside of missile range. Let's just say that. And we were clearly the biggest thing on the horizon at that point. You know, fortunately for everybody, we didn't have to find out how good our missiles are.
Were there any other bases nearby that would have contributed if there was an attack? American bases?
So most of U.S. posture in the region is either aircraft or defensive. So you know, we have Patriot batteries throughout. I'm sure, you know, if anybody remembers the Iraq War from '91, the Patriot missile was the savior of mankind. So that's still, you know, those Patriot batteries are still very much sought after systems in the region, both, you know, by all of our partners. There's quite a few air bases in Saudi Arabia. There's obviously a lot of air bases in Iraq now, Bahrain, Dubai. But most of those are Air Force assets. And for the most part, they've largely been war on terror related. So, you know, with the fight against ISIS and then the fight against the Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Before that, you know, not a lot of higher end sort of capability has been devoted toward the Middle East because it has been necessary. Most of it's either, you know, intelligence or reconnaissance aircraft or, you know, defensive missile systems. But for the most part, there are a couple, maybe 4 or 5 ships every once in a while that go in and out are essentially the entire Navy presence there. So to answer your question, no.
What's the current status? Are you in contact with anybody there?
I think there are 2 carriers currently deployed. I'm not sure where they're operationally at the moment. I think there is one in Fifth Fleet right now, which Fifth Fleet is essentially all of the water in the Middle East. And, you know, if they're somewhere.
I don't want to monopolize the question, so if someone else has a question, feel free.
This is Dennis. I've got a question.
Go ahead, Dennis.
I think there's a lot of focus on what's happening with China in terms of not only their building up of their Navy, but the establishment of these kind of islands that they create and their attempt to have these control over areas of the South China Sea that we and most other countries consider to be, you know, open ocean. What are the chances of a miscalculation by the Chinese Navy to shoot at one of our ships? And if one of those things that happens, how quickly could that spin out of control? Or as you talked about off ramps, I take it that there's been a lot of wargaming to that situation. But how close are we to that potentially happening?
Well, I mean, it's kind of a couple questions that I want to address. So, generally speaking, I think the competition with China, both militarily and, you know, what we call the DIME, the diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, sort of the range of, you know, state actor, you know, actions. That the competition with China across that construct will be the dominant political story for the next 50 years, if not longer. I mean, you know, the Cold War, I think, will be, you know, sort of junior varsity compared to the competition we have with China. I think that there are, you know, the Chinese are very deliberate. They have a long-term plan. They don't think in terms of 4-year presidential cycles or, you know, quarterly earning potential for companies. You know, that they have strategic goals, and everybody in their country, you know, including their private entities, are aligned to those goals. So, you know, it is, I think they're, the pushing out of their boundaries to what they see as historical boundaries in terms of the South China Sea, what we call the first island chain. So, basically Japan, Guam, everything east of that. The Chinese really see that as their historical territorial waters. Not so much what we see as, outside, the general international consensus is outside of 12 nautical miles from your land, you're in international waters. And you have a 200 nautical mile exclusive economic zone, but that does not prevent, or excuse me, three nautical miles. Anything outside of 200 is full open ocean. Anything inside 200 miles from your continental shelf is your area to exclusively utilize for fishing, drilling, whatever. And then inside 3 nautical miles is essentially your area that you could defend with military force. The Chinese don't see it that way. The Chinese see the first island chain as their territorial waters, and they are actively using, much more than just their military. They have, their Coast Guard is essentially a militarized force. It does a lot more than our Coast Guard does. There is not an equivalent there to Coast Guard to Coast Guard. They have something called the Maritime Militia, which is essentially a deputized bunch of fishermen that have military training. They go out in hundreds of ships, hundreds of fishing fleet ships, and go and harass their neighbors, the Vietnamese, the Indonesian fishing fleets. And frankly, we're nationally struggling with a response to that. It is not, it's not our area to defend. We don't have any military, we don't have any territorial claims in those areas. So it's not, we're there at the invitation of those that are conflicting with the Chinese claims. So the Philippines, Indonesians, Malaysians, Vietnamese, I think that they are, over the last 5 to 10 years, seeing that the Chinese have no intent or no desire to reduce their sort of shouldering out of their neighbors, and that they are now turning to us to assist them with, being more assertive of their own territorial rights in the region. But to your point about what the risk is, I think it's very dangerous. I think the USS Decatur, I think it's about a year ago now, came very close to colliding with the Chinese warship right off one of the islands there. The Navy does something called the freedom of navigation operations. So anytime a country makes a claim of some kind of territorial seas that's beyond what is internationally recognized, the U.S. makes a point of sailing a vessel through that region just to make the historical claim that we don't recognize that. Some other nations do that with us, but we regularly do South China Sea freedom of navigation operations around some of those islands that they claim that are not, they're either artificial or overly claimed, and the Chinese routinely respond. A lot of that is with warships and attempting to crowd us off course or shoulder us away. None of those interactions have been with munitions at this point, but I think the Chinese are, as generally speaking, I think the Chinese are too disciplined to allow something like that to result in a hot conflict. What I worry about is a U.S. or a Chinese, CEO of a ship feeling like he is endangered, responding with hostile force because he feels threatened. All ships have, all American ships at all times have the inherent right of self-defense. So if you feel yourself in immediate danger, you have the not only the right but the obligation as a CO to return fire and defend your crew. And I think that miscalculation between COs, individual ships on the ground, is the greatest risk, because we're going to continue to state our claims in the region. We're going to continue to push back on Chinese encroachment on their neighbors, but at some point it's very possible that could result in some sort of hot conflict. I do think the only good thing I will say is I don't think either the U.S. or China wants this to go hot. I mean, there's no good scenario where the two #1 economies in the world that are completely interdependent. I mean, as much as we'd like to distance ourselves from the Chinese, hold on some of the corrosive cyber practices and some of the things they do to our companies in terms of stealing intellectual property. As much as we like to distance ourselves from that, that's not anywhere in the next decade. We are completely reliant on Chinese manufacturing base at this point to fund our economy. So, I don't think that that any individual skirmish would result in full-scale war. But, you know, nobody writes a plan where we all get killed at the end. So, you know, that I think that, you know, hopefully cooler heads will prevail. I think that, you know, I think the Cuban Missile Crisis will be a good example of how, you know, really smart people making good decisions because they care for their country and have, you know, the ability to think a larger picture rather than just respond to in a, you know, braggadocious way will be the thing that keeps us safe. And I hope and pray that continues going forward, because it's going to be an interesting 50 years to 100 years for the next century. Does that answer your question? It was a long answer.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Isaac,
Yes, sir.
as a Jew, did you have any issues in the Navy?
No, I have never had actually any issues with that. The only thing that's unfortunate, I would say, is that there's not a whole lot of Jewish chaplains. So the way the chaplains sort of are in the military is they're they're denominational, but chaplains aren't. You know, I had a Southern Baptist chaplain on my last deployment. He was phenomenal. I mean, he was having him on board through our deployment kept a lot of my guys that would have had, you know, that would have prevented them from being on the ship. He was able to provide counseling that kept them, you know, operationally ready. And you know, his presence, while, you know, I felt for that guy every day because he was bored out of his mind. It was either him dealing with somebody else's problems or, you know, just trying to stay sane himself. So it's tough to be at sea for, you know, 6 months when all your entire job is dealing with other people's problems. So that guy was a godsend, and he was fantastic. And, you know, one of the other ships had a Catholic chaplain. One of my Desrons had a Muslim chaplain. So, you know, they are, you know, very much trained to administer sacrament or, you know, whatever your religious preference is, in a way that allows you to connect with God. We try, depending on the size of the ship, we have what we call lay leaders, which are essentially members of the crew. And on some of the bigger ships, when you have, you know, a carrier or something like that, you may have 1 or 2 chaplains, but then you have several lay leaders from different religions that are able to conduct services. So I've never actually been in a unit or attached to a unit that had a Jewish chaplain. I've met a couple here and there, but it's just fairly uncommon. So.
Thank you.
Have you ever felt discriminated against because you were Jewish?
No. You know, one of the things we talk about, you know, there's rules for our wardroom. We don't talk religion or politics. So so very rarely do we have religious discussions inside my wardroom. So, you know, I've served with Muslim officers. I've served with, you know, you name it, Wiccan officers. So you know, they're you know, it takes all kinds to run a Navy. So.
Marcy, are you there? Next Shabbat, instead of doing it from our parking lot, we can do it from his ship.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, tell us about the status of the ship now.
So it kind of hurts my heart a little bit, but my ship is in an 11-month shipyard period. So we got back in March. COVID obviously started right as we got back. So we were actually one of the last ships to get back before a lot of the COVID restrictions came down. So the Navy is still struggling with that. And obviously a ship is not exactly the best environment to prevent the spread of infectious disease. But yet we can't just all go home and, you know, work from home. You know, unlike other units. So, you know, if you're in a tank unit or you're in a, you know, a Humvee unit or you fly a plane, you know, you can close the door, you can lock up the tank and you can go home, right? So a ship's always at sea, right? Even if it's in port, it's still in the water. So fire, flooding, you know, those things are constant dangers. So even in port, in fact, most of the time they're actually more dangerous in port. So we always have somebody on the ship, we call our duty section, that stays overnight. So there's always, generally it's about 1/6 of the crew. Right now we're in 5 sections. So the crew is divided into 5 sections, and 1/5 of the crew is on the ship for a full 24 hours all the time. So we are right now in an 11-month yard period. So we're doing some very extensive repairs in the ship. You know, we're 25 years old. You put steel in salt water for 25 years, it tends to have some holes in it. So we're repairing a lot of things, a lot of holes in the ship that just have developed over its entire life. We're doing some combat systems upgrades. We're doing actually the majority of our work actually is all structural. So the big things, and those are extremely painful because, you know, if anybody saw the story about Bonham Richard, the large aircraft carrier, small aircraft carrier, large ship in San Diego about a month and a half ago, 2 months ago now, that basically burned almost to the waterline. That was, you know, they were just coming out of an SRA, of a restricted availability, similar to what we're in, and they had some of their firefighting equipment that was down due to maintenance and repairs that, you know, I think the investigation is still ongoing, but they had some things that were down because of the yard period. So it is, and we're in that same situation where we have a lot of our systems that are not operational right now because pipes are being cut out or steel decking is being removed or whatever. So most of what my job now is ensuring that the shipyard, the lead maintenance activity, does what they're supposed to do. So most of my guys are just, you know, we're doing preservation work, we're doing painting, we're doing some repair things, but right now it's you know, it's a little bit, you know, I would say it's a necessity in the ship's life, but it's not why I joined the Navy. So it's got to be done. So I'm glad we're doing it. The ship will be better off for it on the back end, but and right now we look more like an industrial, you know, facility than we do like a warship. So.
Tell us a little bit about your congressional experience.
So I was what's called a legislative fellow, which a lot of the members of Congress have these, especially those in the Armed Services Committee. So I was in the House. I worked for Congressman Joe Courtney, who was a Democrat from Connecticut. He's actually the eastern half of Connecticut, so not the New York suburbs, mostly much more rural. There's a lot of farming in that area. There's a lot of military contractors. So Pratt Whitney, that makes the engines for the F-35 jet and the F-22 jet, has a big facility there. Electric Boat, which makes nuclear submarines, is up there. So I work in his office, generally doing military issues, and it was extremely rewarding. I gotta say, you know, Congress sort of, you know, we all disparage Congress, right? Everybody loves their congressman and hates Congress. So, but being in there and really getting to know some of the, you know, the very, very young people that make that happen. There was the congressman, the chief of staff, and then me in terms of age, and there were about 20 people in that office. So I was 35, I think at the time, 34, and just about everybody in the office, even the people that were senior to me, were all older or younger than I was. And some of them were, you know, 2 or 3 years out of college. And they, you know, they're doing God's work. I mean, they're just, you know, they're writing letters back to their constituents about God knows what. I mean, you know, nobody writes their congressman to say how great their congressman's doing, right? People write their congressman to complain about something. So, and it's not, you don't complain about the little things, you complain about big problems. A lot of times it's stuff that the congressman can't do anything about. So, you know, when you're writing letters back to people that you're offering your heartfelt sympathies for the problem that they have, and that gets tough for a while, but they do it, and they do a great job at it. And one, it gave me an appreciation for just what goes on in a congressional office. But you know, I think my biggest takeaway from that was, you know, I've been always fairly certain in my political beliefs for all my time in my life as an adult. But getting to know people that were on the other side of the aisle, I was in a Democratic office, but and at the time the Republicans still controlled the House. So in the Senate, if you are on the majority, or excuse me, if you're on the minority side in the House, you have literally no power. There's no filibuster. There's no, you know, all the committee assignments go to the committees, control everything, and those committees are controlled by the majority. So you basically have a lot of, you know, you can complain a lot, and that's about it. But getting to know the other side and kind of working with the Armed Services Committee, which Congressman Courtney was on, is generally a very bipartisan committee because everybody, you got to work together with things in the military. So getting to know the other side and understanding that generally those people were coming from places of good intention, maybe different viewpoints on how to, handle specific problems, but they all generally believed in the service and the military and helping the military become a better fighting force. And that was, I think, gave me a better appreciation for, understanding other viewpoints, especially in the political world, and being able to work with the other side, which was extremely valuable as I went forward.
What were some of the committee meetings that you attended?
So one of the big things the Navy's doing, and Senator Courtney in particular was involved in this, was the Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, which is we have a nuclear, what's called a nuclear triad. So essentially our nuclear weapons doctrine for defense against the Soviet Union when it started was, bombers, aircraft, huge aircraft flown by the Air Force that would fly throughout the Soviet Union and drop bombs. We had ICBMs coming from, silos in the Midwest, and we had nuclear submarines that were just essentially hiding in the ocean, waiting to launch ballistic missiles on the Soviet Union in case of an attack. So the Ohio ballistic missile submarine it's very old now. It's getting ready to be replaced. And the Columbia class is coming online now. It's actually just starting. The first one is being built now. It's very expensive. It's got a huge price tag on it. It's supposed to last for another 30 to 50 years, minimum. So that was sort of the major project I worked on. One, because Congressman Courtney was from Connecticut, and Electric Boat was the one going to build. Electric Boat is in Groton, Connecticut, so they were going to build the Columbia class. But also from the budget impact that individual program has on the Navy, it really sucks up a lot of the oxygen in the room because it's so expensive. And especially the military programs are very expensive, and they're very expensive at the beginning because the initial hull, especially on a ship class, those things are extremely disproportionately expensive. They generally tend to come down in cost once you've built 3 or 4 of them, but that first couple are extremely expensive to build. So the trying to pay for the Columbia class submarine while buying more F-35, buying more destroyers, buying all the other things the Navy needs, that the military needs, was a major issue, and it still is. So that was I would say more than anything the thing that I kind of concentrated my efforts on.
Isaac,
Yes, sir.
you are in Arab waters. What do you think about Israel making peace with Arab countries? And also another question is, are you in contact with the Israeli Navy?
So I am not. We did not have contact with the Israeli Navy. There are U.S. ships that are routinely in the Eastern Mediterranean that are, actually we have 4 ships now that are stationed permanently in Rota, Spain, which is on the southern, right around the Straits of, not the Straits of Magellan.
Gibraltar.
Straits of Gibraltar, right. So there are 4 U.S. Navy destroyers that are permanently stationed in Gibraltar now that are there mainly to confront Russia and in the Eastern Mediterranean and ballistic missile defense of Europe. So those guys routinely interact with Russians, with Syrians, with Israelis, because they kind of live there. I did not interact with them personally, but we have a very close military relationship with the Israelis. As far as Israeli peace with the region, I think that the regional competition is absolutely becoming about Iran. Iran is pressing its advantage. Iraq war, one way or the other, whether or not you think it was a good idea or a bad idea, what it did do was it kind of removed the bulwark against Iranian expansionism in the region. Saddam hated Iran, Iran hated Saddam. That was sort of a balancing mechanism there. Without Iraq as a major power now, and especially as a majority Shia country, there really isn't the military force that was amassed by Saddam to counter Iranian influence. So I think one of the sort of unforeseen consequences of removing Saddam was that the Arab countries have had to start to look at Israel as an ally against Iran. And I think that has, we just recently, it was 2 weeks ago, we saw the opening of official diplomatic ties with the UAE and Israel. There's certainly informal ties between the Saudis and the Israelis. And I think those will only continue to improve as the rest of the region realizes that the Iranians are only there to try and dominate them, and that the Israelis are probably the next best military force next to the Americans in the region that's willing to actually, counter Iranian expansionism. And frankly, I think, just because the Israelis live there, they're probably more willing to counter Iranian expansionism than the Americans are, because they have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis. So I think it absolutely is a good thing. I think the country, the region, and the world, for that matter, need somebody to keep the Iranians in check, so that that region just not destabilize into continued conflict. And so I think that is a good thing. I think it will continue. I think no matter who the president is in 2021, I think the Israelis and the other Arab countries realize that is a positive relationship, and they'll build on it.
I have a question, Ilya Cherkasky. When you were in Strait of Hormuz, you said you had to operate together with British Navy. What about other countries? Do other countries send their navies in Strait of Hormuz?
Absolutely. So we saw Indian ships there. We saw Pakistani ships there. There were French ships frequently. There's so much commerce that goes in and out of the Strait of Hormuz that pretty much everybody who's got a navy goes there at some point. The Russians were regularly there. The Chinese were there on a regular basis. That region, just from its sheer natural resource endowment, is critical to so many countries that everybody who can send a ship there sends a ship there. We have partners that we work with. There's sort of different tiers, I guess you could say, of U.S. partners. There's U.S. allies that we have an official treaty with. So the British, the Canadians, the Australians, those sort of operate at a level of coordination that goes into classified realms, where we have our own sort of classified relationships with those countries, and we share information. Then we have nations. There's something called the Combined Military Task Force that does maritime security operations in that region. And I think there's something like, at this point, like 130 different nations that actually contribute forces to that. That does essentially maritime security operations, looking at trying to stop piracy and patrolling the waters around there, and in around Somalia and the Bab el-Mandeb Strait by Djibouti and Yemen. So at any one time you could have a dozen or so different navies in the region that are participating, or forces from different countries that are operating in the headquarters. Frequently the Combined Task Force operates under most of the time it operates under non-U.S. leadership. That is a shared leadership construct. So sometimes it's the Pakistanis, sometimes it's the Dutch, sometimes it's the French, sometimes it's us, and it rotates around the countries that participate in it. So it's a phenomenal construct. It has to be very limited, because a lot of those countries will not contribute forces to anything that is seen as countering Iran, so to speak. But they will definitely contribute to maritime security in terms of stopping piracy and ensuring the free flow of commerce. That kind of thing.
What's happening with piracy? We haven't heard very much about that recently.
I think when I was in the Pentagon, right when, if you remember the Maersk, Alabama, so I was in the Pentagon doing Middle East affairs, Navy at that time, and we had found that if the cargo ship's freeboard, I want to say, was above freeboard, meaning the distance from the water line to the first area you can climb on the ship, right? So like the gun wall, or whatever you want to call it, right? If that was above 12 feet, and the ship could go faster than 14 knots, that it didn't get pirated, because the pirates were unable to get their ladder up high enough, or they were unable to catch up with the ship. So one of the great things about capitalism is that commercial companies figure out these things and say, well, I know it's going to cost me X number of dollars if I lose a ship to piracy, because I'm going to have to pay insurance. So I'm not going to put a ship that I guarantee is going to get pirated into that area if, you know, we think we're going to lose it. So the sort of, you know, we responded, the Navy obviously went over there, and we set up something called the Internationally Recognized Transit Corridor. So the China, I mean, you know, a dozen or so countries, if not more, participated in this. And essentially, we would set up convoys that would go from the Bab el-Mandeb out to the eastern portion of, you know, where the Yemen-Oman border was, so way outside the Somali pirate area. And they just kind of group up together, and we'd have a warship or two that would take them from one point to, you know, point A to point B, or, you know, from east to west. And then on top of that, with, you know, knowing if your ship was so big and it could go so fast, it sort of just took care of the problem. And it still happens periodically, but it's not nearly as widespread, because I think mainly the opportunities have been removed. So the companies just learned, like, hey, we're not going to do the things that get us pirated, and that kind of took care of it. We still have some ships that operate in there, but it's not nearly the level it was. There was not nearly the level of piracy that it was happening, you know, in the early 2010s.
Isaac, you served on the coal, and we know the history of the coal. What has the Navy done to make sure that kind of circumstance doesn't happen again?
Quite a bit. I think there's a good book called Front Burner, written by the Commander Lippold, the CEO of the coal at the time, that talks about his experience. But you know, if you go back to when the coal was bombed, so I think it was October 2000, the world was very different at that point. We were still trying to, you know, obviously pre 9/11, but you know, we were, I would say the calculus for putting ships into dangerous positions for, let's say, the diplomatic benefit of having a Navy ship go into a country. So, you know, Navy vessels are, you know, tools of U.S. diplomacy. Having a U.S. Navy ship pull into your port is a big deal economically for a country. It's also a big deal as a show of sign of, you know, relationship with that country. So having the Navy pull into Yemen was more of a diplomatic priority than it was necessarily a military priority. There are other areas in that region that we could have refueled. The coal could have refueled. So, you know, I think that there was, since then we have significantly changed how we look at those things. I think we're not as, you know, I like to think about, you know, I did my master's program on national security and terrorism, and I had one class that looked at, you know, what would it have taken if you had gone to all the airlines pre 9/11 and said, hey, we want you to put vaulted doors on your cockpits, just in case somebody could have broken into your cockpit during flight. And said, no way, we're not going to do that. You know how much money that's going to cost? That'll never happen. It's not a threat. It's never happened before. Why are we going to do that, right? So, you know, you can't really judge a crisis pre-crisis, right? Nobody gets points for averting a crisis that you never know happens. So, you know, there are significant things in terms of our techniques and procedures, the weapon systems we have on board now in terms of smaller caliber weapons. So we essentially have the destroyers have a howitzer size, like a giant cannon that's really used for, you know, troop support on the beach. So it fires, you know, 12, 13 miles. We didn't really have smaller caliber weapons that were made for small boats. We put a lot of those on. We have 50 cal mount. We have 360 degree 50 cal mount, 50 caliber gun mounts around the ship now. So we have 100% coverage. We also have gun systems now that have electrical optical cameras on them that can see, you know, heat, you know, thermal imagery, that are stabilized, computer stabilized, so that you have a much better opportunity hitting. You know, if you think about, you know, you ever watch American Samurai, or what is Last Samurai with Tom Cruise, right? You know, you see the samurai trying to fire an arrow from a horse. Well, he's trying to fire an arrow from a horse at a target on the ground. So think about trying to fire an arrow on a horse at another guy on another horse, right? So that's essentially what firing a weapon at sea is, right? So both targets are moving, and they're, you know, obviously they're driving, and you're moving in a three-dimensional plane, not just two, because you're going up and down as well as side to side. So it's very difficult to hit a moving target at sea with a manual weapon. So the Navy has invested a lot of money in optically stabilized and, cameras that can track and then target, other small boats or fast boats or whatever, things like the Cole or the things that the Iranians use, and they're much more accurate than they were in 2000. The technology the technology changed a little bit, but it's really the Navy investment has been such that we have much more of those weapon systems on board now. So we're much more prepared for that kind of contingency, I think, at this point. And we just don't go to bad places anymore.
But you just went to Lebanon.
That was interesting. So I would say that you couldn't walk inside of probably 10 miles of our port without being stopped and frisked by Lebanese Armed Forces personnel. I mean, the Lebanese Armed Forces spent a lot of money, and I mean, that place was locked down. So, it was a priority for the government. It was a priority for the armed forces to show. I mean, I was more nervous going into Beirut than I was any point during the Iranian thing in the Middle East or in the Arabian Sea. Just because all of the stuff we've all read about Hezbollah and their propensity for doing bad things. But after we got there and we saw the level of effort that they were expending, the very professional and very effective force protection measures they were putting in place, how far their bearings were out. I mean, they were sweeping the pier regularly. There was nowhere you could look that you couldn't see. I mean, hundreds, if not miles out, hundreds of yards, not miles out, that you were seeing, armed forces presence. They were on the street. They had a command center. So, I mean, they made a very obvious effort, one, to make us feel comfortable, but also to make sure that we were safe, and that visit went off well. So, there was none of that when the Cole pulled in the Yemen. That was not something we did at that point.
Okay, we've been going for about an hour now, and I don't want to keep Isaac too long because he gets up early. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't mean to dominate this. All right. Well, I guess not. Then Isaac, I thank you. It's good to have you back at RODEF. Long time since your bar mitzvah here. I want to say thank you to everybody who tuned in. We will give you notice of our next program and our next speaker. And as I say, if anyone has any suggestions or ideas for either programs or speakers, feel free to contact me. Marcy, anything to add?
No, I just want, Isaac, thank you so much. This was really interesting. Thank you for agreeing to do this and be our first speaker for our renewed men's club. And again, thanks to Warren for getting this organized and for Rabbi Kander for kind of getting Warren to take over men's club. And I think this is a great kickoff and we're looking forward to more speakers, Warren. Thank you.
Okay,
and I'm glad you're letting us women, I see a lot of women on here, so I'm glad you're letting us women come.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for your service.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I wouldn't recognize you anymore.
Hopefully that's a good thing.
It's a good thing. It's been a long time.
I gotta say, I mean, this was amazingly technically effective. I'm shocked that this went off and we didn't have to reboot Zoom 4 times and we were gonna have 4 people's dogs barking in the background. So congratulations to everybody who went into the technical, the setup of this, because it really went out very well. So thank you for the opportunity.
We're proud to have you as one of our sons and wish you always good luck.
Thank you.
Stay safe.
Well,
Thank you for your service.
thank you.
Yes.
Okay, we're leaving.
Shana Tova to everybody. Thank you.
Yeah. Shana Tova. Hey, Boo.
Oh, hey, Ma.
How's it going?
What's up? Good.
Hey, we need some books.
We need to mail you some books. Oh,
Yeah,
the prayer books?
Yeah, you know what? So, I mean, you're still going to go to the house over the weekend and get our clothes?
Yeah, I have a lot of Rhoda stuff to do, but I will do, or I'll send Jimmy or something. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, so maybe you could send the books up with the clothes.
Okay.
Maxine, are you in Colorado? Yeah, we're staying until like October 14th or something. Well, have a good house.
Hey,
Cold up there.
Everybody.
It snowed, yeah.